Well, you've made it. We're at the end of the course and it's time to test your skills by creating your final project. So the next few modules are going to discuss what's required of you in a series of phases, 3 phases to be exact. The first 2 phases are going to be evaluated as a regular course assignment. Phase 3 is the actual implementation of your project, and that's where your final project ISU mark will come from. The final product with the accompanying documentation, of course, with it. So what we're going to look at right now is the introduction to what you're actually supposed to do. So let's start off with the basics. First off, deadlines. Deadlines are going to be enforced very strictly and electronically for this assessment, which means it will track by the second how close you are to the deadline. So there is no valid excuses. So what you're looking at right now is just a quick short list of invalid excuses that I commonly hear every semester and thusly ignore. You should be able to plan ahead for all these circumstances and anything else that comes up. You have lots of time, and you should be planning. For any problems that may arise. So just to quickly go over them, things like your computer breaking, your USB key getting lost or stolen, or anything along those lines. The Moodle being down or slow. It's always down and slow. If it's not the Moodle that you're submitting on, whatever website it is that we have you submitting on at that time, the internet is the internet, and it doesn't always work as optimally as we'd like it to. I ran out of money on my print account. There's only one portion of this entire project that requires you to print. So for the few cents that it requires you to do so, either print it at home or maybe get a friend to allow you to print it to their account. Find a solution. Finally, so-and-so did not get their part of the assignment to me in time. That only accounts for the fact if you're working with a group, which is only the grade 12 portion of this project. Grade 10 and 11 is an individual project. But in any case, when you're working with other people in a group, you have to realize that you are committing to them and saying that you're going to get your part done. But that means you have to police each other. You got to make sure that people are on task, people are hitting their deadlines. It's up to you to solve that problem. Basically, just get it done. That's it. Figure out whatever the problem is and get around it. Go through it, whatever you have to do. So briefly, just talk about the project itself. The purpose of the project is to demonstrate your grasp of the fundamentals of programming and problem solving. You're going to implement a full project to completion. It's the to completion part that really matters there, because many people are over-ambitious or they're under-ambitious. You're going to use everything that we've learned in class and beyond. It is an independent study unit after all, which means you are going to take your concepts that you know and you're going to expand upon them and hopefully apply them in new and interesting ways. So basically, what can you do? Well, what you see below you is a few examples, but let me just give you a broad overview. First and foremost, the assignment is really looking for you to create a video game of your choice. So please make sure that the game that you choose is something that you're actually interested in, something that you would like to play. That's really the important part here. Now there's a few caveats to this. You cannot do any remakes of existing games. They must be new ideas. They can be based on existing games. So for example, you might have a platformer game that plays a lot like Super Mario Brothers, but may look different, may have a few different game mechanics that really makes it its own. The only exception to this remake rule is if you are digitizing a real board game. So for example, if you were making a digital version of Monopoly or the Game of Life or Sorry or Candyland or something like that. So what I've done is I've come up with a few different suggestions and roughly the difficulty level for each of these suggestions so you can try and gauge where you should be aiming. So if you're a novice level programmer, meaning you're struggling with some content, but you still have a good understanding, then you may want to do something like an endless runner. Now, we may have done an endless runner for a previous assignment in the course, and if that's the case, you have to find a way to make yours stand out and be different from the one you've already done. A space shooter, something like Galaga or Space Invaders or something like that. So those are your novice level projects. On the intermediate side, this is your average student in the class who's been keeping up filling out their work, and generally doing okay. So digital board game. So there are some complexities to this, but there's also some other things that you can do some pretty interesting aspects with. Platformer, something like Super Mario Brothers, Sonic the Hedgehog, those types of games. A projectile game, something like Angry Birds or Gorillas or Worms. There's so many other games out there that are very similar to one another. And then we get into the advanced column. Now this column is for the people that have been pushing themselves really hard all semester. They're way past what's expected of them in the course itself, and they're willing to put in the time to actually do something really fantastic by the end of this course. So if you're not in that boat, if you're not committed to actually spending the time that's required, you shouldn't even be looking in this column. So in any case, a role-playing game. These games are big. They are large. There's reasons why there's hundreds of people that work on games like Skyrim and whatnot. If you choose this, you're obviously going to dial it back a few notches. A digital collectible card game like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering. There's a lot of complexities in here because a lot of times the cards contradict one another, their abilities need to interact with one another, and you're going to have to learn a lot of new concepts, things like a stack. And then finally, a tower defense game. Now, a tower defense game is a bit variable. Sometimes you can choose a simple version of it that might be something more like Plants vs. Zombies, or it might be something more complex like Pixel Junk Monsters, and there's a bunch of other ones out there as well. But they're very interesting games, but you can do a lot with them, and they can become very challenging depending on how complex they get. And then I have a few other broad ones just to help round out the issue here. A matching puzzle game, something like Tetris, or an item finder game, or Bejeweled, something like those, where you're searching or you're trying to solve simple puzzles. Now this stretches across all three categories because it really depends on how far you go with it. And then really any other interesting game of your choice. So just run it by the teacher and you'll either get approval, a yay or a nay, or you may have to go back to the drawing board and come up with a whole new idea. So that's basically what's expected of you. In the next module, we're going to talk about some terminology.